Ladies, ladies and gentlemen, please come in and take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please come in and take your seats. The program is about to begin.
Hello. I want to commend all of you for being here promptly. Thank you. Much appreciated. If I could get the folks in the back of the room, if you guys would mind coming on in and taking your seats, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. So before I introduce our next speaker, I want to share a data point, and a little bit of a spoiler alert, it's a little bit depressing. For the past decade, the number of donors contributing to U.S. charities has been declining. I'm sure everyone in this room knows that. Nonprofits in virtually every sector are struggling to find every dollar, whether it's $1 or $51 or $151 or $51,000. Those dollars are harder and harder to find. And according to Giving USA 2019, charitable giving has declined 1.7%. And while that doesn't seem like a lot, when you look at it in the aggregate, it is quite a bit. And it has a meaningful effect on what our sector is able to do. And for individual organizations, 1.7% means quite a bit. It means quite a bit in terms of how we're able to do our work. The good news is that there are ways to learn from our data of how we can improve that bottom line and make the most of the resources that we do have. And our next speaker is going to be able to help us shed some light on this particular topic. Chuck Longfield is a retired chief scientist from Blackbaud. And through his time at Blackbaud, really dug into this question of what does donor data tell us? What does the data tell us about how people give, how we unlock the opportunity for people to give more, and how do we make sure that the information that we're collecting as we do our work as nonprofits, that we are leveraging to the best of our ability and to support our organization. I have to tell you on a personal note, and Chuck doesn't know this, I had been at NetHope about 3 months and was still very much in the drinking from the fire hose state of moving into a new job. And I happened to be in an event and Chuck spoke, and I came home like, oh my gosh, that was awesome. Because all at once, the ability of how organizations can use the assets that they have unleashed by technology and unlocked by technology really became crystal clear to me, not just on the work that we do in the field, not just the work that we do in the back end, but how actually we bring all of that together in order to advance missions for our organization. So I am thrilled that we will be able to benefit from that insight today. So please join me in welcoming Chuck Longfield to the stage.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Lauren, for that introduction and for all the great work that you and your team do every day. Let's see. Well, good morning. I guess maybe some of the coffee's still wearing off a bit. How many people here studied Latin in high school? Oh my goodness. I was wondering if anybody did it, or if you might be fearful of putting up your hand and I'd ask you to translate some passage or something for homework tonight. Oh, I'm going to need my clicker. I'm sure all of you that studied would recall that Caesar said that all Gaul is divided into three parts. And coincidentally, my presentation today is divided into three parts. In the first part, I'm going to present some statistics on philanthropy. They're challenging statistics because, as Lauren pointed out, these are somewhat tough times for raising the funds that you need for your mission. In the second part of the presentation, I'm going to talk about some of the causes that may be creating these negative trends. It isn't clear what actually is causing them, but I think some of the causes that I'm going to present are plausible reasons why. And then in the third part of the presentation, I'm going to talk about some of the things that we could do, as Lauren said, that data and technology holds tremendous promise for what ails us right now. So here goes. Oh, and actually two things. One is, if you are curious where Gaul actually is, it's basically France with a little bit of a lot of the countries around it. I'm sure that you were wondering about that. And the other thing that I need to mention before I show you my first slide is, my first slide is really packed with numbers, and I apologize for it. It may be hard to actually read some of the numbers. I'm going to highlight all the critical pieces of information from it, but it's an infographic. In fact, I'll bring it up on the screen. It's an infographic produced by Giving USA, which is a nonprofit out of Indiana University that that tracks philanthropic data and actually produces this very chart every year, and it looks exactly like this every year. The only thing that changes is the year and the numbers on the chart. So the first thing that I'd like to highlight is the number that's in the upper left-hand corner, $427 billion. That's the amount of money that was raised last year that was given to all nonprofits in the United States. I know some of you are actually from international venues, and I'm going to actually provide some numbers from outside the United States, so this isn't so US-centric. But in this case, this is $427 billion, and what they don't show are two very critical numbers on this chart. One is, how did that number change from the previous year? And it turns out that that number is roughly the same. It actually is less than 1% higher than the previous year, but if you actually adjust for inflation, it means that giving was down a couple of percent, which the inflation number is actually a very important number because all of you want raises every year, and your missions cost more money with the resources that you have to garner to do your work, and so inflation is really an important part, because if you had just a level budget every year, you actually have less money to do what you're doing. And it turns out that for quite a few years, giving has been growing very, very slowly top line. The amount of money that is being given is growing very, very slowly. And so that's a challenge. But the second number is actually more insidious here, and that is the number of people that gave that amount of money. There's about 150 million households in America. Slightly over half of them contribute to anybody, to any organization. It's about 55% of households contribute. And the number of households that have been contributing has been going down for a long time now. And so that's actually a bit of a problem. If you play that out, obviously, eventually there'll be very few people donating an awful lot of money. And that bifurcation of money is actually what is happening. Generous households, not just high net worth households, but because there's a lot of households that don't have high net worth that is still very generous, but generous households are responsible for about 85% of all of philanthropy, and generous households are about 10% of all the households. So there's about 15 million households in America, and they're giving almost all the money. Isn't that something? And so the other 90% of households give, some of them, but it's not an awful lot of money. And as the years go by, fewer people are giving more money, each household, so fewer households are giving more money and keeping philanthropy afloat. Obviously, we're going to need to figure out some solutions to that. There's one other negative number that I want to provide. I'm not a big person into just presenting an off. Actually, there was something on the slide I wanted to highlight. Over on the, let's see, your right-hand side, it actually breaks it down by sector. And your organizations are disproportionately in the human service, international affairs, and environmental animal groupings. And human service was down just slightly last year. This is within that 427 billion, and then they provide the inflationary numbers, which are about 2% less than that. The one sort of two good data points there was international affairs actually was one of the only sectors that did well. International affairs bounces up and down every year because of disasters and such, so that's actually has more variability than most other sectors, and the environment actually did quite well. Just before I leave, I'll give some international numbers. If we, and these numbers, these numbers are from 2018 versus 2017. The next few numbers that I'm going to give around the world are actually right now, so the last 12 months compared to the previous 12 months, because I track philanthropy, or actually I say I retired, so I used to track philanthropy. Other people at my company at Blackbaud now do it. But if you go to the UK, giving is down 2% year over year. If you go to Canada, giving is down about 2% year over year. If you go to Australia, it's pretty much flat, but it's been down 5 of the last 6 months, so that doesn't bode too well. The one country that's actually a standout, and I don't actually have good data to explain it, is Germany. Germany's doing gangbusters and is doing just fine. But an awful lot of countries are challenged, including the United States. Okay, so here's the other trend that isn't a good trend. So when I say that fewer people are giving every year, one of the biggest problems within that are finding new donors. You know, people naturally sort of phase out of philanthropy, either because of demise or they move on to other organizations. And so organizations are always trying to find a new donor, you know. And actually, I'll tell you, a lot of times they want to find a new millennial donor, but I always joke with them, find a new 55-year-old donor. That person has more money to give away than millennials, and we're going to be talking about that in a second. But organizations spend an awful lot of resources trying to find a new donor. And when they get them, 4 out of 5 don't give to them again, go away. That's something. So a person decides to give their money to you, and then right after they do that, the next year you ask them, do it again, right? You did it last year, do it again. And 4 out of 5 say, yeah, no, I'm moving on to somebody else. I'm going to do something else. And if you look at this trend, 4 years ago, it was 3 out of 4. So 75% of people didn't give again. Now it's 80% of people don't give again. So the retention rate of new donors is going down, and this is a trend that also needs to be addressed. So fewer people are giving. So those are the broad 2 things I want you to take away. Fewer people are giving, but the people that are giving more money, holding up philanthropy, and it's getting more and more challenging to hold on to new donors. All right, so what's causing this? Well, in the United States, this is pertinent just to the United States, the Tax Act had an interesting effect. If you remember a year ago, 2 years ago they passed it, the Tax Act doubled the standard deduction for U.S. households. Up until, and so the standard deduction, I think at the time was $6,000 for an individual. They doubled it to $12,000, and for a married couple, it became $24,000. Up until that time, 30% of people in America filled out, in a sense, the long form of their tax return and actually listed all their contributions and got deductions for them. 30% of American households, 45 million households. After they doubled this deduction, 10%. We lost 2/3 of the people who itemized minimize their charitable contributions. Now, most people don't give charitable contributions because of the tax deduction. That's not what motivates most people, and there's research that shows that, but it does have an effect. And in fact, the estimates are that somewhere between $13 billion and $20 billion of philanthropy was lost because of that tax act on an annual basis. So that's not such a great thing to help us. The recession. The recession's effects have been long-lasting. 2007, the Great Recession, really hurt a lot of families, but it in particular hurt a part of their budget called discretionary income. And economists have great ways to define all of these, but my definition for discretionary income is how much money you have left over after you pay for everything you had to pay for. So you have to pay your mortgage, you have to pay the electric bill, you have to buy food for the family, you have to buy gas to get to work, but you didn't have to go out to a fancy restaurant. That's not discretionary income. You didn't have to buy a new outfit of clothing. You could just keep the ones that you had. Discretionary income took a tremendous hit in 2007 and has been very, very slow to come back. And so, understandably, that's been another negative effect on philanthropy because that's where philanthropy comes out of, that part of a household budget. By the way, I'm going to try to finish 5 minutes early and open it up for questions. So if you have some questions, I'd be happy to take them. Millennials. So I mentioned about if you find a new donor, find a 55-year-old donor. There's a lot of millennials. So this general topic is demographics. We just lost the most generous generation that America has had, the World War II generation, a generation that really believed in institutions to change the world, that if we come together, we all pitch in. That generation is pretty much gone. And the millennials are moving up. The challenge with the millennials, well, they were replaced by the baby boomers. The whole thing is shifting, but the millennials are moving up. The problem is millennials have, this slide says $1.5 trillion of debt. It's actually closer to 1.6 trillion now. It's a tremendous amount of debt that they've been saddled with, and it has been hurting lots of things for that generation, like buying houses and establishing families and such. There isn't, that's going to be with them for a while. So that's another very plausible reason of why we have fewer donors giving. Lastly, well, actually, I'm going to even do a couple that aren't on this slide, but the election. This is an example of something that is not impacting the lack of philanthropy. I was curious. One of the great things about, I had a company called Target Analytics for many years, which did data analysis and built software and such for hundreds of nonprofits, many of you in the audience, your organizations. And I sold the company to Blackbaud 12 years ago, and they made me their chief scientist, and my job was basically to do anything I wanted. And I'll tell you, if you can get, and I'm retired, so if you can get that job, I highly recommend it. It's a great job. I had an immense amount of data at my disposal, and all I had to do was come up with ideas that would make Blackbaud look good in terms of thought leadership. So one of them was when Obama got elected and philanthropy had part of this initial few years of trends going down, I thought, I'm going to figure out if people make contributions to politicians, does that take away the money that they gave to a nonprofit? Right? Wouldn't that be interesting to know? And I thought, I'm probably the only person in this country that could answer this question. And so I actually pulled all the data on people who made contributions to politicians. Turns out that information is readily available. And I matched that up to data about their charitable gifts. And it turned out that the people who make political gifts, by the way, the paper is online. You can go to the Blackbaud Institute. It's a little dated now because it's about 6, 7 years old, the paper. But it turned out that the people that made political contributions, they actually increased their philanthropy if they made political contributions. And the people who didn't make political contributions, they decreased their philanthropy. I think it was going to go down anyway for them. And so the conclusion of that is, and the conclusion that I drew, is that the people who give these political contributions, for the most part, have some resources, discretionary income that they can give away, and they believe in the ability that their giving can affect the world around them, whether it's affecting the person that they want to put into office, or it's affecting the nonprofits that they support and the missions that they're doing. And so I do not, and then the other way you think about this is, roughly there's $5 to $10 billion of political contributions a year, and this, as you just saw on the slide, $400+ billion. So it's unlikely $5 billion is really having a market effect. Now, one thing that does happen with political giving is that there's a bunch of organizations, sort of the Planned Parenthoods and ACLUs and Southern Poverty Law Center, that really are at sort of the nexus of sort of philanthropy and political giving and stuff. They do quite well at moments of, and the same thing would be working for the other sort of political side, depending who's getting elected and such. A couple of things that aren't here is the stock market affects philanthropy a lot. So stock market goes up, people give away money. And one other thing is religious giving. It's been shown that church attendance has been down for a very long time, and a lot of people learned about philanthropy sort of in the pews and synagogues and mosques and such with their parents. And so with church attendance being down, it might also be understandable that sort of developing a habit of philanthropy has also been affected. So those are some plausible reasons. You can take your pick. Okay. So what do we do about it? Part 3. So the first is analytics and improving the allocation of resources. And I want to do this by telling a story, and it's a story about one of your organizations and my personal philanthropy, the Nature Conservancy. I have a house up in New Hampshire, and the Nature Conservancy 5 years ago or so were kind enough to buy the land, 300 acres of land on the other side of the lake, from a little old lady who was selling them. She had died, or her family sold the land off. And I was very appreciative that I wouldn't have to look at houses that would be developed on the other side of the lake. I'd be able to keep looking at trees. They had a cocktail party on the lake. I went to the cocktail party. They told us what they were doing. The land cost a few $1 million. They needed to raise the money. They were buying it anyway, but they're a very efficient organization, and they buy it, and then they internally have to pay it back. So they had to raise a few $1 million. I wrote them a check for $1,000, and I thought I had done my good deed. I subsequently have, my oldest daughter has become a raging environmentalist at the University of Vermont, and she's, so now my philanthropy has shifted significantly, but at that time I really wasn't that into environmental causes. I was mostly into public education. And so I thought the $1,000 was my good deed, and if everybody on the lake gave them $1,000, they'd pay for the land, kind of thing. So I was done. I went back to Boston. This was up in New Hampshire. I went back to Boston. And the New Hampshire Nature Conservancy called me up at home a couple of months later and said, would your children like to go snowshoeing on the land you helped us buy? I thought, oh my God, are you guys good? I mean, think about that. I mean, I'm sure all of you have made contributions to organizations, but your children going snowshoeing on the land you helped them buy? First of all, I knew that $1,000 didn't help buy the land. The land cost millions of dollars. But I said to them, I actually joked with them, I said, my children would like to go snowshoeing on anybody's land. And so I agreed to meet them over Christmas. They took my children with coloring books and crayons. My children were 4, 4, and 7 at the time, and they followed rabbit's feet in the snow. And that was the development associate, and the executive director took my wife Susie, who actually happens to be in the audience watching for the very first time me present. And they took the two of us and told us how. Is it still up there? The slide? Oh, because it's not here anymore. Guys, if you're wondering, I know the slide, so I'm fine, but it's not here anymore. They said, it told me how important the Pine Barrens were to New Hampshire. It's like the whole ecosystem of the Northeast would collapse without these trees. So it was a lovely day. And I went back to Boston. They went back to their offices in New Hampshire. And being in the profession, I knew that what they just did was spend $2,000 on me. They took two people out of the office, drove a couple of hours over to my house on this lake, and I had only given them $1,000. And I, being a mathematician, I knew you can't keep doing that. You can't take $1,000, spend $2,000 unless you're going to get more money from the person. So a couple of months later, they called me up. They said, we're going to just happen to be in Boston. And I know they're reeling me in here. And I had lunch with them. They asked me for a much bigger gift, and I gave it to them. And so in a 5-month window, I went from a reasonably good gift to a much larger gift. And this example is critical because it shows something that I think all of your organizations need to get very good at today, especially with these declining donors. You need to align very early in a donor's relationship the resources that you're willing to allocate for the return that you're willing to get. In other words, everybody that went to that cocktail party, I don't think got to go snowshoeing. Just my gut feel. Maybe someday the Nature Conservancy will tell me whether everybody got to go snowshoeing. And what they did is they used probably a lot of factors. They actually have quite a well-developed analytics group at the Nature Conservancy. And they used, it's back up, thank you, yes, super. They use a lot of, in all likelihood, they used a lot of data, some of it capacity. Obviously, you can't give a bigger gift if you don't have the money to do it. But other data, knowing I had children, maybe it was something at the cocktail party I mentioned that they took away, but they remembered and developed a plan around. And they decided that it was worth spending $2,000 in hopes of raising more money. And whether I had given them $1,000, $100, $1 million, every organization, you have too many donors. In fact, actually, it's a great audience that I have here because most of your organizations have very large databases. You have a lot of donors, but you can't take them all snowshoeing. You'd go broke doing it. And so you have to figure out very sophisticated ways to look at the data that is coming up and knowing whether or not you should do something. And I'll give you one other funny example about the value of data, because many of you are actually in the analytics side or certainly in the IT side that some of this falls under. I have always believed that data is king, that if you can get better data, you can do a lot of things that maybe you're over on the side doing neural networks to try to eke every last ounce of information out of the data set that you have. You can use far simpler techniques if you actually have great data. And one example is that there was one organization that I work with that does a lot of thank you calls to donors, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about this in a second. And they, on the call, when they're talking to the person, sometimes the person says, "Oh, I love you guys. What you do every day saves the world. You're like my most important nonprofit." And then sometimes they say, "You disturbed me in dinner, and don't you ever do that again. I hate you guys for doing it," whatever. This organization had those conversations with thousands and thousands of people, and they coded the conversations that these conversations were awesome, positive conversations, negative conversations, neutral conversations. And then guess what they did with the data? Nothing. And it was like, you want a passion indicator? You want something to help you decide whether to allocate more resources? You might want to talk to the people who just told you they loved you on the phone, personally. And no, we just put that into our computer system and we don't use it for anything. And so I think if you're not collecting, by the way, I call them passion indicators, but if you're not collecting passion indicators, and I also wrote a paper about that that's on the Blackbaud Institute, so you could look at that. But there's lots of things that donors do that are like waving their arms saying, "I like you," right? You know, same thing in a relationship. Some people are friends, some people are willing to, you know, to marry you or something, but you need some indicator to know the difference. So, okay, benchmark. There's actually going to be another presentation about benchmarking, but I want to tell you why this is really important, and it's a little bit of another story, and I have 10 minutes. I'm right on schedule, so okay. I compare a lot of times fundraising to the medical profession. I went to a conference once, and a woman at the conference, it was a medical conference, she was talking about healthcare costs, and she said one of the principal drivers of medical expenses, healthcare expenses, was the variability in practices. I was blown away by that. I thought, there's no variability in practices in medicine. It's like you have a staph infection, you know, you get penicillin, you got to take it for 10 days, they're paranoid about it. It's like, don't take it for 9 days, take it for the full 10 days, you know, kind of thing. And when they said that there's variability, she was actually talking about like doing things arthroscopically or surgically and talking about that as variability. Some doctors do it one way, some do it another. It turns out you can save a lot of money if you do things arthroscopically. I thought, well, you should look at fundraising. If I asked 100 fundraisers how they do something, there'd be 100 different ways that they did it. And the problem is that in the medical profession, they can go spend $1 billion. They do a clinical trial, and they answer the question, was penicillin better than whatever the alternative was? They answer the question, and they answer it definitively, and they spend a lot of money to keep answering it. In fundraising, each organization tries to answer it for themselves. You don't have a lot of resources. You do the best you can to answer the question. And a lot of times you come to different answers. And in another presentation, if I had time, I'd show you what some of the variability is, because it's just a riot how the same person gets treated by different organizations in different ways. And everybody feels like that's the best way. But it isn't the best way. But benchmarking helps you with that. One of the things I started 25 years ago when I started the target analytics company was I started benchmarking organizations. And guess what you find out? If I put a couple of organizations in a room and one of them retains, remember when I said the first year retention rate was really bad, 20%? Well, wouldn't you want to be better than 20% of holding on to these people? Well, what if I had 3 people in the room and one of them had 20% retention, another one had 20% retention, and one of them had 30% retention? Well, wouldn't you want to know what the 30% person was doing? Now, again, sometimes in our profession, we look at the 30% and we say, oh, well, you get the 30% because you have better donors than I do. Or you get the 30% because your mission is different than mine. And we explain it away that way, as if I couldn't possibly get 30%. There must be something extrinsic that you do that's different. I couldn't possibly do it. But it turns out that's absolutely not true. That in most cases, the reason the person's getting 30% is they're actually doing something causing the 30%. There's actually a best practice or 2 best practices that they do that's like the secret sauce, and it's not universally known. But benchmarking can help you with that. You can see who the high performers are, and you can actually try to understand. And in general, I usually, when I'm talking to fundraisers, I just ask them to be open to the possibility that the way they do it might not be the best way, and that someone else might have a better way of doing it, and if you look at the data, you might find that out. So I encourage all of your organizations to look into benchmarking in a way to try to identify best practices. Okay. All right, guess what? Are you seeing anything else? No? All right. What comes after benchmarking? This is the low-tech solution. Yeah, I got it. Oh, no, I did millennial. Oh, collaborate. Oh, the collaborate one is interesting. And I'm going to try to just do this last one in 1 minute, and so I can open it up for Q&A. So, now it did all of them. There we go, collaborate. So NetHope is a great organization because you have drunk the Kool-Aid 18 years ago. Congratulations to both of you for helping to start this. But you drank the Kool-Aid and said, if we all work together, we could actually do a better job than if we all try to do it individually. Yeah, go figure. And that's awesome. The collaboration that I want to encourage you to do is to collaborate around research in terms of philanthropy, to find out either, when I was saying what these best practices are, to find them out. And I'll give a quick example of this, is that there was a woman about 10 years ago that wrote a book that said that if you call donors and you thank them for their gift, they're going to give you 40% more money next year. I thought that was, wow, that is awesome. That's great. You just have to do like a 50-cent phone call them and thank them, and they're going to give you 40% more money. So I worked with some organizations, and we did hundreds of thousands of thank you calls, hundreds of thousands. We thought, well, the money's going to be rolling in. This is a great idea. And but being a statistician, we actually also analyzed the data. And to make sure that there is peer review, which we don't really do in our profession too well, but again, the medical profession and professors do, there are 200 professors in the United States whose primary form of research is philanthropy. If I had a room full of fundraisers here and I said, how many professors do you know in this country that actually research the very topic that you do every day? They would say, 1, 2? Like, how would you? You're talking about this, there's a professor who's spending their PhD time figuring out how to get people to give more money. The answer is yes. But they don't work with nonprofits. They do tests with graduate students. They give them play money, and they say, donate to these 3 organizations under these 3 conditions. Then they write a paper about it. And so I've been trying to encourage our profession to actually engage with these professors, because the professors are very good at peer review, are very good at statistics, are very good at being smart. And what they lack is data. And you guys have a lot of data. And so when I did my thank you calls, I actually partnered with the University of Chicago. There was a woman out there, well, first a guy, John List, but then this other woman, Anya Samick, and she analyzed my data, came to the same conclusion that I came to after doing 400,000 thank you calls, which is thank you calls have 0 effect on subsequent giving, nothing. They don't hurt, but they don't help. And so that's, now, it turns out that what is great about peer review is vary the experiment a little bit and try to do and see if you can get it to work and such. But that's what we need to do. Okay, I went over a little bit. I'm going to stop here. There's one more thing here, but I'm going to stop because I want to give you a chance to ask questions. So, any questions? I know I'm supposed to pause for a very long time because then you'll raise your hand. Oh, there's one over there.
Hello?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yes. I'm Krista Lincoln from Dan Church 8 from Denmark. A reflection from my side regarding your slide about donations. What we see is really a fatigue in giving to international emergencies, especially victims of conflicts. It's too complicated for normal people. I mean, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys in Syria these days? And we see much more shift to giving towards something which is nearer to you. I think if you have any reflections on that.
Well, yeah, so I assume everybody heard the question about, like, when there's conflicts, it's hard to actually sort of explain the conflict. Probably a couple of things. One is I would say that, when donors give dollars in unrestricted forms, then you can be the wise person to actually identify where to give it. Obviously, it's a challenge in your profession because a lot of times you want to use the conflict as the motivator, and then you're held to a very high standard in terms of actually how you spend the money and how you worded where the money was going to go and whether or not you did that. And so I think that you have a bit of a challenge of trying to maybe generalize what the purpose of the money, what the mission is, to try to gain some flexibility over it and do that. One of the challenges with international relief, and when I was showing that 20% retention of first-year donors, you have a lot of times with these disasters, the humanitarian need is great, and you have and a lot of people will send in money, but you have an even harder time to hold on to that support in subsequent years. A lot of times you're down in single digits, and trying to get people to say, help us, give us money for, for next year's disaster, or get us ready, or infrastructure, or whatever. But I don't have any magical answer to solve the Syria problem. It's hard.
If you had a magic answer to solve the Syria problem,
Yeah. I'd come out of retirement.
Yes, I think we've got time for one more question, so I hand this to you, Carl.
Hi, Chuck. Thank you very much, Carl Lowe from CRS. Just maybe a couple of things. Maybe the first question would be, so if calling them doesn't work, is there something simple that does work?
Yeah.
And that's number one. And number two is we've looked at it not slightly differently, but we've done something different with the data, and that is we've intentionally decreased our direct mail cost so that we now have the money instead of giving the money to the post office.
Yeah. Wow, I have 0 time left, but maybe I'll answer the second question because I think that's an awesome question, but I'll do that. It's not going to be fast. And now I have a horrible memory. The first question, just prompt me again. Oh, thank you calls. Yeah, what does work? Well, certainly thanking them. If you don't thank them, but there's inexpensive ways of thanking them, and I think that's more of like a negative thing. Like if you don't thank them appropriately, they hold it against you. But I don't think they want you to actually be lavishing a lot of money on them unless you think it's going to lead to very substantial additional gifts. The thing about the thank you calls is that there were 2 elements that the woman who wrote the book, Penelope Burke, I've had many conversations with her because obviously she wasn't too thrilled with my study that I published, so she countered with who the messenger is makes a difference, right? So you could have a telemarketing company, you could have the executive director, you could have a board member, you could have staff. So I think subsequent testing is needed to find out, like, does the messenger make a difference? The amount of money might make a difference. Like if it's a $1,000 contribution, they might be more receptive to the call and what it's going to mean in subsequent giving, but doing them for lower dollar calls, maybe the economics aren't quite right, and varying when the call happened. Like, do you do it right after the gift, or do you do it months later before you're about to ask them for another gift, and so it's more front of mind. So there's more testing that's needed, but I would say what is needed is you do have to thank them. And there was no negative effect, and by the way, that last thing I said about the data about recording the quality of the phone call, it may turn out that the call, who cares that it didn't do anything to most people's giving if it allowed you to identify people who are passionate about your cause, because I have shown that those people go on and give you more money. Even with you doing nothing, they're going to go on and give you more money. So before I get pulled off the stage, thank you. Yeah.
Many years ago, I sat on the board of a food bank in Seattle, Washington, and I remember making all of those thank you calls as a board member. I don't know if it worked or not, but certainly the influence of that book and that belief was very pervasive. And so it's great to see how we can use data to actually pick those things apart and understand what really works and what doesn't. So let me thank Chuck for being so generous with his time this morning. I think one of the ways that we all benefit is certainly giving may not be on the upswing these days, but certainly our experience at NetHope as a community has been that collaboration and that contribution that each of us bring to the table. Folks have been very, very generous with their time and their resources in order to facilitate these types of conversations. And I do want to, before I introduce our next speaker, who certainly falls into that category, I also want to take a moment to specifically thank the sponsors that made it possible for us to bring our Global South delegates here this week. That's the first time that we've been able to do that. It's not so easy to make it from point A to point B, especially when point B is Puerto Rico, as all of you know. But through the generosity of Dan Office IT, Mapbox, and Open Systems, we were able to bring those 10 delegates here this week. So please join me in giving them a round of applause for making that possible. And one of our delegates stopped me during the break and said, this is fantastic. This really helps me pave the way for bringing more folks at the regional level and at the country level into these conversations. So if you haven't had a chance to meet some of our delegates, please find them at one of the breaks because they've got some really fascinating perspectives to bring to this conversation. At some level, our next speaker really needs no introduction. And certainly, his organization needs no introduction. Microsoft has been a partner of NetHope since the very earliest days of the organization, and we have all benefited from their generosity, both in terms of financial resources, but really the expertise and the contributions that they have made over the years to the conversation that we are all having. Justin Spelhaug has come into this conversation over the last several years, and his perspective have been a new way of looking at the work that we are doing and the work that the work that Microsoft is doing in their ongoing conversation about how they evolve their work in the nonprofit space. Justin's role in running Tech for Social Impact has really been critical in shaping the way that the company thinks about where they're going forward. And they've been very effective in working with their partners. So today, Justin's going to join us and talk a little bit about how we move from CSR to total social impact. And with him is Raymond Campbell, founder of Phulukisa Health Solutions. And they're going to talk about their partnership and the work that they've done together and getting us to this question of how do we measure impact and how do we really look at the impact of the work that organizations are doing both in the nonprofit sector and on the corporate side. Justin.
Great. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. It always feels like a family reunion to come back and see so many faces working on the same issues. I thought I'd share a few minutes about how we're thinking about re-architecting our social impact and philanthropy strategy at the company so that we're able to have a greater impact given the magnitude of the challenges that we're all facing. And I'll start with a personal story that emanates from a trip we did about a year ago out to Kakuma, which is a refugee camp in the northeastern corner of Kenya. Who's been to Kakuma? Okay, a few of you. Kakuma was built in 1992 for a few thousand people fleeing southern Sudan, children mainly, violence in southern Sudan. And since 1992, it's grown from a few thousand to almost 200,000 people sheltered in mile after mile of tin huts, with so many organizations in this room on the ground, UNHCR on the ground, providing just amazing services, whether it's food, wash, educational, legal services, to what is a pretty challenging situation. I had the opportunity to sit down with one family of Somali descent, and I naively asked them, were they excited, because we were at an airstrip, to be flying back to Somalia. One of the daughters in the family looked at me, kind of just stared at me, and said, listen, I've lived in Kakuma for 17 years. This is my home. I'm, in fact, hopeful but fearful about what my next journey will entail. And it hit me like a ton of bricks, right then and right there, thinking about this one family, 17 years in Kakuma. 200,000 more people who are on average spending 17 years in this camp, and there are 70 million refugees and internally displaced people around the world, and that's just one of the issues that this room is working on. And so the question for us at Microsoft is, how do we rethink this concept of philanthropy, this concept of social impact, so that the work that we're doing and the position that we hold in the world measures up and actually creates a dent on these issues. I don't have all the answers. We're making probably as many mistakes as we are having successes, but I'd like to share with you how we're shaping investments so that we might find new areas to partner in this room to move these issues forward. Our approach starts and ends with skills and access to jobs. There are hundreds of millions of people today being left behind in the digital economy. From Kenya to Kansas, jobs are being refactored. We are part of that displacement of jobs through new technologies like AI. New jobs are being created, and we have to do a better job bringing people with us into the 21st century economy. We're doubling down on investments in digital skills. In the last 12 months, we've had about 12 million, mainly youth, get access to new computer science curriculum in the US through depth programs that we have, more broadly internationally through breadth programs that we have. We have a very specific focus on refugees and communities at risk. Investments, I see UNHCR right in front of me here, or IRC right in front of me, focused on helping refugees coming into the United States get the skills they need through resettlement centers. We're making investments with UNICEF to create digital platforms that will help 25 million children on the move get access to the education skills that they need as they enter and exit different school systems through their career. And we're making investments with UNHCR in specific camps to help those camp situations. Now, all those statistics can seem a little impersonal, but the impact is very real and very personal. And there's one person that we met named Grace when we were in Kakuma. And with Grace, we made a decision to make some modest investments in creating a digital skills lab that I think is having a very real impact. And it's great to see the work that this individual is doing. Let's go ahead and roll the video.
My name is Grace Phulukisa. I'm 23 years old and I've been here for about 17 years. I am here because of war. I always say Kakuma is a place of opportunities, but only to those who seek them. I wanted to train women in basic computer skills. I just had the idea, but then it was not possible. You know, for you to start a project, you need to have some resources.
In a world that is increasingly adopting technology, we don't want refugees to be left behind.
We need to change the narrative of the refugee because they have skills and they have talents. If you give them the opportunity,
UNHCR and Microsoft are pioneering a new partnership to provide future-ready digital skills to refugees and also members of the host community in Kakuma. It is a 3-year project which aims to provide digital skills training to 25,000 young refugees, and then we empower them to train and teach the others.
Now here comes people who will train me on how to do it, and they'll give me opportunity to train others. It was like a dream come true. We will go through it, everyone will understand what we are doing. They're learning how do you open a computer, how do you shut it down, how to do data entry, and operate businesses online. This is education for all.
The private sector really will play a very crucial role to partner with the humanitarian sector like UNHCR and other partners to help the refugees to start redefining their pathway.
Success will be when we're able to reach the most underserved members of the community, especially women who are often excluded. One of the focus of this project is to attain 50% participation of females.
Digital tools have played a very critical role to us because they have been our wings to fly out from Kakuma.
I feel very empowered. This is what I always wanted to do, and now it's here. Whatever dreams we have, we should be sure that it will one day come true.
I love that video. Yeah, go ahead. Because it demonstrates the power that modest investments with passionate people like Grace can make, but it also reminds me that there are millions more Graces that we need to support and that we need to do more in this area, which brings me to the next piece of our strategy, which is getting all 130,000 rather, of our employees engaged in giving. This has been a focus for us since 1983, and we're doubling down with how we're getting our international teams and our U.S. teams even more engaged in supporting organizations in this room. Over the last year, we donated $163 million between employee and employee match, 760,000 volunteer hours across a whole lot of nonprofits in this room and about. This is going to be an area that is core to our culture, core to any new people, any new hire, recruiting millennials, and really an area of doubling for us. One of the newer investments that we've been making is in the AI for Good initiative, and this is really how we're applying technology to solve and lean into environmental science, humanitarian, accessibility, and issues around arts and culture preservation. This has been a $115 million investment over 5 years, and that's actually growing. It includes things like cash and Azure credits for nonprofits, but more importantly, we're building a full-time data science team that does nothing but work on these projects and help unlock capability. We're proud of the work that Team Rubicon has done to use AI to automate how they understand volunteers and their volunteer skills so they can deploy volunteers to the right place at the right time. We're proud of the work that many of you have been involved in with Humanitarian OpenStreetMap that allows us to respond more effectively in time of disaster. But the project I'm most proud of, I've talked about before, and that's the work that we've done with the World Bank to help create a system that helps predict food insecurity before famine occurs. And the reason I'm proud of it isn't because it's an incredible tool. It is, and it's being used in Africa today in a number of different locations. I'm proud of it because Google, Amazon, and Microsoft came together in a partnership to build this capability, and that's something we need to see a lot more of in this sector, and look forward to having discussions throughout the course of the next couple of days on how we can make that cross-sector partnership more and more a reality in how we work. Finally, tech for social impact. This is an area of tripling down. And this team, as a team that I had the privilege of helping found and lead, brings together philanthropies with commercial support, with technology and an R&D team to focus on helping nonprofits use technology to drive mission outcomes and mission impacts. We engineered a unique financial model behind it such that all of the incremental profit that we generate out of these efforts is reinvested back into more technology and into these initiatives. In fact, some of that was what helped fuel our AI for Good expansion so that we could do more AI for Good work. To give you a sense, given that there are many CIOs here in this room, of what we're working on and what are some of the new things coming out, I'll take you through a quick tour of our strategy, which is quite simple: building effective, affordable, relevant solutions that work in the global south as well as in the north, ensuring that you have the capacity to use this technology, and ultimately, when we move into the cloud, that you trust the way that data is being handled from a privacy, security, and ethics perspective. As it relates to our technology strategy, we have 3 clouds, but it's really one cloud, underpinned by the nonprofit, your common data model and common data service that lights up all of these capabilities. Today, through a combination of about $1.5 billion in cloud donations, as well as through discounted cloud offers, we have 150,000 organizations on our cloud and growing quite rapidly. Now, clicking in to each cloud for a moment, our modern workplace focus has been to make modern workplace a premier collaboration platform and security platform for everyone in the nonprofit industry. Turns out there are 4 million charitable organizations roughly in the world today. 80% of those 4 million organizations have less than 10 people. I know there's a lot of larger organizations here in this room, but most organizations, 99.9, are very small. 1 month ago, we announced that we were going to make our premium Microsoft 365 business SKU that brings together the best of Windows, the best of our cloud collaboration, Office 365, on-prem, as well as cloud bits, the best of our security capabilities, free for up to 10 seats. We expect that to cover 90% of the organizations on the planet that have 10 FTEs and help them get into a modern environment. When we couple that with some of the investments we're making in capacity building with TechSoup, it really creates a powerful capability, we hope. Now, we're seeing more and more organizations move to Microsoft 365. Mercy Ships recently moved to Microsoft 365 E5 to drive a renewed security footprint, a better collaboration footprint in their existing ship, and a new ship that they're launching so their doctors can spend more time on their patients. But like you, Mercy Ships has many volunteers that are part of their operations, and we've not had a good answer to how we make volunteers part of this collaboration canvas. One thing I'd like to announce today for NetHope only, so that we can learn together, is a new offer. And this is a new volunteer benefit that we're attaching to Microsoft 365 E3 and E5, where we'll be making 10 free seats per M365 seat available for volunteers on our frontline SKU. And that frontline SKU is tuned for a majority of the volunteer scenarios that we see, provides everything from collaboration to mobile device management to AD integration, so your volunteers can be part of your overall collaboration environment in a seamless way. For Mercy Ships, that means 8,000 seats instantly provisioned that they can light their volunteers up on that are free based on the investment they've made. I look forward to getting feedback from you on this offer so that we can continue to tune the offer so that it works for all the volunteer different scenarios that you have and that we're seeing. On Azure, we're continuing to double down on investments on infrastructure, security, and data. You're going to hear a lot more about that in Eric's presentation. We're also continuing to double down on the Global South. We have 2 new data centers that we've invested into South Africa. We're working on hardening fiber all across the African continent as well as in Southeast Asia. And we've put 2 development centers in Kenya and Nigeria. Eric and I are looking, as it relates to nonprofit technology creation, putting our development resources in the Global South, more of them, so that we're creating jobs and economic opportunities as we work to build technology together. Eric will talk about our strategy on making data warehousing, data sharing, and data workbenches much more seamless. And we're leveraging a great steering committee that brings together ActionAid, DFID, and a number of organizations in this room to drive that strategy. So I'd encourage you to go to Eric's session to hear about that one. On business applications, our core investment here is around the common data model and the common service. You heard Dan talk about that. It lights up Biz Apps, it lights up Power Platform, it lights up Modern Work, it lights up Azure, it lights up all of the capabilities that we're trying to build, and hopefully it creates a level of interoperability across the industry that lowers the cost and the time of implementation of all technology solutions would be our ambition. Coming up with the version 2.2 release, we'll be releasing a new set of accelerators around monitoring and evaluation. You heard a little bit from Dan yesterday to help organizations accelerate their implementation of program measures and outcomes. We're also working to add in new standards to automate reporting and transparency. IATI is already built into the infrastructure, but we will be releasing with 2.2 a new alignment to SDG targets and indicators so that you can automate SDG reporting for those that need to do that, which are most organizations in this room. Now, none of that technology is very effective unless you have the skills to use it. And this is the single biggest philanthropic investment coming out of my team to support this sector. First are our investments with NetHope in the technical literacy and learning track, which is powered by our Microsoft community training platform to help give you the skills that you need in your organization. We've also made an investment with TechSoup in the nonprofit digital skill center. In the first month, we've seen 1,000 active learners engage in content, and we're continuing to add more and more courses to that. We've done 17 Dream, Design, Deliver, now called Idea Sessions, engaging over 300 different leaders in this room and in your organizations. And you'll hear a lot more where we'll be talking about this Microsoft community training platform that we think is a powerful tool for the sector. This is an extensible learning platform that does as good of a job teaching frontline workers how to use sanitation and wash techniques as it does in teaching digital skills. It's optimized for low bandwidth environment. It's optimized, UNICEF is pushing us hard in innovation here. It's optimizing also for a completely disconnected state where your environment may only be connected once a month, but you still want to drive that rich learning experience. So if you're operating in remote environments, if you've got frontline workers that need to train up, I think we've got a great platform that's in private preview. We'll be moving it to public preview. No licensing cost other than the underlying Azure that it consumes. Finally, trust. Everything that I've just talked about is done in the cloud, and so it's imperative that in how we think about privacy and the work that we're doing to make GDPR not just something that we do for Europe, but a standard that we deploy for all of our customers and all of the data centers that we operate, to the Cybersecurity Tech Accord, which is 62 organizations working on a set of security standards to improve where we're at today, to the investments that we are actually making in TSI and more broadly in hardening democratic campaigns at the US level today, but soon international, from state actors and state threats so that we can have a clean democratic process. All of this in an effort to build trust in the right direction. But the real magic is when all of this comes together with an entrepreneur with a vision and some amazing technology that drives true impact on the ground. Somebody that's inspired me greatly is here in this room, and his name is Dr. Campbell. He's the head of an organization called Phulukisa. Before I bring him up, I'd like to run a video to just give you a sense of what this individual has done, and then we'll have a quick conversation. Run the video, please.
Healthcare in South Africa is very challenging. The biggest burden sits in the rural areas. It's a vast country. People have to travel big distances to access the correct care. How do you take a specialist out into a remote area? This is what we do at Phulukisa. Phulukisa means to heal in one of our local languages. We ended up building a cloud-enabled backpack which tests for 10 most common diseases: HIV, tuberculosis, diabetes, heart disease. In our country, we've got a very, very high maternal mortality rate, of the worst in the world. And these are all things that are super important when you're screening a pregnant woman. The backpack can go on the back of a health worker, so you can literally knock on people's doors and screen them at their homes. The data is collected and uploaded to MySQL database in Azure. Almost immediately the results are pushed back on Power BI and delivered to the clients no matter where they are.
Precious came to our clinic as a patient who had a previous miscarriage and she did not understand what's going on in her body.
On my first miscarriage, I was suffering from high blood pressure. Because of the lack of instruments, no one can help me. My child just died inside of me.
So when she came, we screened her to check all those things on a woman. To get the results will take about a week, but with the backpack, it takes just about 20 minutes.
Everywhere there are people with great ideas around the world. But what's the gathering place where these dreamers get together and have their ideas come to life? It's Microsoft. It's literally a place where we get to weave the tapestry of the future.
Now I'm 8 months pregnant. My child now, I'm going to call him Blessing. The new technologies is giving us a hope and a new bright that even our generation, like me, my child, will be healthy. So I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy.
All right, please give Dr. Campbell a big round of applause. Good to see you, Doctor. Have a seat. So, Dr. Campbell, this is really pretty amazing technology. Tell us a little bit about how this whole thing came about.
Well, at Phulukisa, we thought of approaching healthcare in a digital fashion. So, definitely the backbone of it is housing our solution in a digital environment. And we thought that we would use health workers to expand their capabilities. And it's really just a continuum of services where you can give it as a desktop version in the clinic. You can do it as a mobile unit on buses that can access remote areas. But the real beauty is the backpack version, which can enter into people's homes. And obviously the health workers got that trust already embedded in their services that they would traditionally be giving. But now you can build on that in a modular fashion. We can provide screening services using blood, vision, hearing services, and imaging services. And of course, through something like Teams calls, you can also invite the specialist right into that environment, which is great.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, it takes a very advanced set of capabilities and brings it right to the front line. Some might say that's revolutionary. I know you have a view on that. What would you say to that question?
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool what we are doing, but some of the revolutions that we've spoken about, you've alluded to already. I mean, the cloud with Azure capabilities and the work that Microsoft is doing, that is really, we're just latching on to that and expanding how it can be implemented. So from that sense, it means it's the reason why I could leave my boring job as a urologist and climb on top of this revolution that's happening. Underpinning all of that, though, is old magic, and that is collaboration. I think that really sums up how this revolution is taking place.
It does, it does. Now, so many of the organizations in the room deal with limited bandwidth scenarios. I know you have to deal with this as well. How are you tackling that bandwidth problem?
Off the bat, we knew that connectivity, as with data, is the new commodities of this world. So it is the new gold and the new oil. We approached that by making the data packets that we employ as small and flat as possible so that it allows for functionality of our system in even the remotest of areas. To be honest, the very first project we did, we used not normal GSM capabilities, but we used TV white space, unused TV white space bandwidth, and that worked pretty well. We have since tried things like SIG Wi-Fi, LoRaWAN. There's obviously satellite capabilities, so definitely we're cognizant of connectivity in order to give the capability of our solution.
There's a lot of potential and unused spectrum in white space and elsewhere, so we need to tap into that. You know, one of the other things that we all look at on all these initiatives is how do we think about the impact that we're actually having? What's your view on measuring the impact of this work?
Yeah, look, a lot of the participants here have a very traditional way of approaching impact, you know, the lenses that they would use, be it numbers reached, quantities surveyed, efficiencies, and so forth. We tend to think that through the use of our technology, we can deliver services quicker, more comprehensively. We can make the decisions immediately. And because we're shortening that feedback loop, the time it takes to make decisions and to literally touch those people's lives so much faster.
Drives health outcomes.
100%.
It does. If you could leave this audience with one thing, what do you want them to know about Phulukisa and the work?
Yeah, I think that there's a common thread through all of the participants at an event like NetHope, and that is people want to change lives for good. And they want to do it in a very deliberate fashion. And with this digital revolution that has taken place, a lot of people's cheeses have been shifted. I mean, they need to stay relevant and reach the same KPIs in an environment that is new to them. And because they might not always have the best ideas or the brightest, you know, the latest IP, it can become daunting. But I think that another thing that is flowing through NetHope is to collaborate with the Phulukisas and the Microsofts of this world. So I think that if you want to stay ahead of the pack, and if you want to make sense of this noise, talk to us.
I think that's a good way to end it, and that is what NetHope is all about, is sharing ideas, creating these connections. Throughout the next day or two, if you see Dr. Campbell, please reach out and connect to him. I know the work he's doing relates to many of your operations, and let's see if we can find the partnership. Dr. Campbell, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And, you know, to wrap up, it's the work that Dr. Campbell does, it's the work that you all do each and every day, whether it's in Kakuma, whether it's in conservation, whether it's in the global south or here in the United States, that inspires us to do what we do every day. So I want to thank you for that. We look forward to talking to you throughout the next couple of days, finding areas for partnership so we can move forward. Take care. Thank you.
You guys have read my mind. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Dr. Campbell, for something very inspirational. I know everybody is starving. I'm not going to hold you back. Please enjoy lunch, and we'll see you as soon as lunch is over. Have a good afternoon.